So, as I said last lecture, utilitarianism actually seems a lot simpler than it turns out to be. The basic idea is not complicated, but when you start to get more details of the theory, it turns out to be a lot more complicated and have a lot more going on than I think people realize. A lot of my students will love utilitarianism, or at least that'll be the theory they always want to use because they think it's simple. Well, it isn't. And I want you guys to keep that in mind when you have to do discussion posts on this, that there is a lot more going on, that things will be more complicated than it might initially seem to you. And part of that just is that you have to think of everyone who might be affected. And, a lot of times people will think about utilitarianism, they'll think about the most immediate people, they'll reach a decision, and it'll be wrong because they haven't thought about the more wide-ranging consequences. But there are other features of utilitarianism that make the theory more complicated than it seems. One of these is that intensity matters and not just the number of people affected. Now, it is usually true, more often than not, the utilitarian in most cases, whatever makes the greatest number of people happy will be right. But I don't want you guys, I never want to see you give this as an explanation of utilitarianism. If you do, I will mark off pretty harshly because it's wrong and it's importantly wrong. Usually, in most cases, what the utilitarian will recommend will in fact be what makes the most people happy, but that is not the basic statement of the theory. The basic statement of the theory is whatever creates the greatest overall happiness, and sometimes actions that make more people unhappy will in fact create the greatest overall happiness. Well, how could that be? Well, intensity matters. How intense the pleasure or pain is. Something that makes a lot of people a little bit unhappy, but one person blissfully happy might be justified. Or vice versa, something that makes a lot of people a little bit happy, but one person absolutely miserable might not be justified under utilitarianism. And I think there are a few ways to explain this, right? Look, if you wanted to have the most money, what would be better, to have 500 pennies or one $100 bill, right? Each penny is worth just a tiny amount of money. There's a lot of them. Well, there's only one of the $100 bill, but it's worth a lot more, right? In the same way you can think of actions, I'll give you guys an example. Imagine that I had a friend in college who was deathly allergic to peanuts. I'll use him in this example. Imagine that some of us want to go out to eat. Maybe there's like 5 of us, 4 of us who aren't allergic to peanuts, and this guy who is. Well, imagine that 4 of us, the thing we want most is Indian food or Thai food. Say Thai, there's even more peanuts in Thai food than Indian food, right? And, we would be a little less happy for anything besides Thai, like burgers or whatever. Imagine that we decide we're going to go get burgers. We will all be a little less happy. But even so, 4 people a little less happy than they would have been, well, he will be way happier because he could actually eat something here without dying, right? Or going to the hospital. This is not the action that makes the most people happiest. The utilitarian might support it because, the intensity matters. We would only be giving up a tiny amount of happiness. He would gain a huge amount. We'll come back to this. They might not like any of this because utilitarians are, for reasons we will come to, not big on meat eating generally, but that's a point I'll come back to at the end of the lecture. You guys might think a little bit about why that might be. If you've read the article, which hopefully you have, the New Yorker piece, hopefully you can guess. My point for now, though, is just intensity matters. It is not just the number of people, it is how happy or unhappy they will be made. All right, so let me introduce the next complication for utilitarianism. Let me give you guys a problem case. Imagine that a little boy falls in an icy river. You could save him from drowning. Should you? And of course, most of you are going to be saying, well, of course, what kind of idiot are you? You should save him. Not only should you save him, isn't this a lot of the point of the Singer article you had us read? Kid falls in the water, you're supposed to save him. Obviously, you're supposed to save him. Common sense morality before we ever came into an ethics class tells us that. But what's more, don't utilitarians obviously believe that? Think of Mr. Singer, right? Well, what if I told you that the river I had in mind and the little boy I had in mind were in Passau, Germany in 1894? Would that change your view on this? Think about the time and place. Well, you might have, in live classes, usually someone fills it in by now. I'm guessing some of you might. What if the little boy is Hitler? Right. And it's not clear. In Passau, Germany, there is a newspaper clipping that this little boy, about, I think he was 4 at the time, fell into the water and was saved by another boy. The newspaper does not give the name of the boy who fell in the icy river, but it gives his age, and Hitler was precisely the right age. And all the locals in Passau say that this was Hitler who fell into the water. So it's not 100%, but very good evidence, very good chance that it was Hitler. All right, so why is this a problem for utilitarianism? Well, it's a problem because, if you see a little boy drowning in the water, you're probably thinking, I will save him, his family will be happy, I will prevent this horrible thing from happening to him. He will feel all the pleasure he's going to get from going on living that he wouldn't get if he drowned. But if you thought that, you don't know who this little boy will grow up to be. If, in fact, this other boy did save Hitler, he might think he's doing a good thing. You might think he's doing a good thing. But the overall long-term consequences are horrible. And you might push this against the utilitarian. You might say, look, you say do whatever will create the greatest overall happiness, which is the most happiness for the most people considered in the long term. But you know what, Mr. Utilitarian? You don't know what that is. I don't know what that is. That is impossible. Think of someone in this good fashion like Socrates raising this issue to the utilitarian. You say do whatever creates the greatest overall happiness, but it turns out that is impossible to know, and if it's impossible to know, your theory doesn't work. It asks us to do something that's impossible. Here's what the utilitarian will say in response. It may be impossible to know for certain what the consequences of your actions will be. But you know what the likely consequences are. If you save a little boy from drowning, he might grow up to be the next Hitler. That is really, really, really unlikely. It's almost as likely, if not more likely, he might grow up to be, the guy who cures cancer, right? Or some great political leader on the order of Abraham Lincoln or Gandhi. That's just as unlikely, but it's probably just as likely, if not even a little bit more so, than that he will grow up to be the next Hitler, right? What's more likely than either of those is he's just a normal little boy who will grow up to have a normal life, who won't do anything earth-shatteringly evil or good, but, is loved by those who care about him and will experience pleasure in his life and will probably bring some happiness to others. When you think about the odds, utilitarians will say there's no problem. And obviously, we think about the odds all the time in our life, right? You might be taking a class that is super hard, and, imagine that you need to study, the night before the first exam. Somebody says, just blow it off. Let's go watch a movie, have a few drinks. And you're like, no, this class is really hard. I don't have a good grasp on this material. I need to study. I certainly don't need to drink or stay up late. Imagine your friend says, well, yeah, but you don't know for sure that the first test is going to be hard, right? I mean, maybe the rest of the class is hard. The lectures, all the quizzes are hard, but the exams are super easy. There's professors like that, right? If the exam's super easy, you're going to be doing all this work tonight for no good reason. Nonetheless, you should probably stay in and study, right? It's possible the test will be easy. It's not likely, right? And what will happen if it is hard as you think it is will really outweigh the good of, having a few drinks or just going out and doing something, right? So on and so forth, right? Or, if you took every penny you had in the bank and put it in lottery tickets, you might very well win. You are not going to do that, hopefully. And why won't you do that? Because it's not likely you will win, right? So we do this all the time in day-to-day life. We think about, the chances. Utilitarians will say, of course we have to do that when applying the utilitarian theory. And this gives us the so-called utilitarian calculus. I mean, luckily, it doesn't involve actual calculus. You're not going to get, derivatives or integrals or any of that really fun, complicated stuff. It's much more basic math than that, right? When you want to know what the right thing to do is, you think of, on the one hand, pleasure, and you think of the intensity of the possible pleasure, the number of people that will be affected, and the odds that this thing will happen. That's your plus side. Then you want to set up the minus side. You think of the pain or pains. You think of the intensity, the number of people who will feel it, and the odds that this bad thing will happen. You do this sort of calculation to determine what the right thing to do is on the utilitarian theory. A final point for applying utilitarianism is that you should note, you'll see this in the New Yorker article, and you'll see this in a lot of other places, utilitarians think that animals matter for morality. And it's not just that animals matter. Most utilitarians, there's a few weird dissenters, but most of them will say animals matter exactly as much as people. Well, why is that? Think about if pleasure and pain are what you care about. Well, can animals feel pain? Yes, obviously. Can animals feel pleasure? Also, obviously, and if you've ever had a dog or a cat, you know this. If you don't, you should still know this. So if you're a utilitarian and pleasure and pain is what you care about, animals are just as capable of feeling pleasure as we are. Animals are just as capable of feeling pain. So animals for a utilitarian will matter. For this reason, a lot of utilitarians will be vegetarians. All right. Let's move on. Still don't, I think we mostly have the theory on the table. Going to start seeing how it would respond to some possible objections, though.